The blizzard hit without warning. Temperature dropped 40 degrees in 2 hours. Wind howled like wolves through the empty streets of Riverside. Snow came down so thick you couldn't see 3 feet ahead. The kind of storm that makes the evening news, that shuts down highways, that sends people scrambling for shelter and safety. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. And in the doorway of an abandoned clinic on Morrison Street, wedged into a corner that barely blocked the knife-edge wind, a woman sat hunched against the cold. Her thin coat, bought from a thrift store 3 years ago, when it still had all its buttons, did nothing against the brutal temperature. Her hands, chapped and raw, were tucked under her arms, trying to preserve what little warmth her body could still generate. Her name was Sarah Mitchell. She was 42 years old. She had kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled, though she hadn't smiled much lately. She had brown hair streaked with premature gray, pulled back in a ponytail held together with a rubber band she'd found on the sidewalk. She was a registered nurse with 12 years of experience. She'd saved lives in emergency rooms. She'd held the hands of dying patients. She'd worked double shifts during flu season and never complained. She'd been Employee of the Month 4 times, and she was homeless. But what happened in the next 12 hours, what Sarah did for a stranger freezing to death in that storm, and what 400 men on motorcycles would do for her, the next morning would prove that miracles still exist in this broken world. That angels don't just live in heaven, with wings and halos and harps. Sometimes they live in doorways, with nothing but 3 thin blankets and a heart that refuses to let compassion die even when hope already has. And sometimes they ride Harleys, wearing leather and patches that make people cross the street in fear. Before we continue, I want to thank you for being here. Tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Because this story, this true story about kindness and redemption and the power of seeing people as human, needs to be heard everywhere. 6 months ago, Sarah Mitchell had everything. Not everything by society's standards. She wasn't rich, didn't drive a fancy car or take exotic vacations, didn't have a big house or designer clothes, or any of the things social media says you need to be successful. But she had enough. And more importantly, she had purpose. She had a 2-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of a modest building on Riverside's east side. The apartment had a view of the river if you stood on your tiptoes and looked out the kitchen window at just the right angle. The carpet was worn. The appliances were old. The heater made a clicking sound that kept her up some nights. But it was hers. Her name was on the lease. Her furniture, secondhand and mismatched, filled the rooms. Her photos hung on the walls. Pictures of her father, of nursing school graduation, of happier times that felt like they belonged to someone else's life. Sarah had a job at Riverside Memorial Hospital that she loved. Not liked, loved. The kind of love that made her set her alarm for 5 a.m. without resentment. The kind of love that made a 12-hour shift feel like service instead of work. She worked in the emergency department. The chaos, the urgency, the thin line between life and death that required split-second decisions and steady hands and a heart that could care deeply without breaking every single day. 12 years she'd been there. Started as a new grad, nervous and eager, making mistakes and learning from them. Grew into a confident nurse who doctors trusted, who could start an IV on the most difficult veins, who could calm a panicking patient with just her voice. Her coworkers were her friends. Real friends. The kind who brought her coffee without asking, who covered her shifts when she was sick, who celebrated birthdays in the break room with grocery store cake and genuine affection. She had a locker in the staff room with her name on it. Inside, scrubs in her size, all neatly folded. Navy blue scrubs with her name embroidered in white thread on the pocket. Sarah Mitchell, RN. Those letters, RN, meant something. They meant late nights studying pharmacology. They meant clinical rotations where she was terrified she'd hurt someone. They meant passing the NCLEX exam on her first try and crying with relief. They meant a commitment to care for people at their most vulnerable. Sarah had a routine she loved. Wake up at 5:30 a.m., coffee, black, no sugar. The early morning quiet before the world woke up. Drive to the hospital as the sun rose, painting the sky in colors that made her grateful to be alive. Clock in at 7 a.m. Receive report from the night. Shift nurse. Check on her patients. Assess, medicate, comfort, advocate. 12 hours of purpose. Of being needed. Of making a difference. After work, she'd drive home the long way, past the river, watching the water reflect the evening light. She'd stop at the corner market and buy dinner. Nothing fancy. Usually a rotisserie chicken and a bag of salad. Enough for 2 nights. At home, she'd change into comfortable clothes, eat dinner while watching the news, then call her father. Her father, David Mitchell, 71 years old. Retired postal worker. Widower for 15 years since Sarah's mother died of breast cancer. He lived 3 blocks from Sarah's apartment in a small house he'd owned for 40 years. Every evening at 7 p.m., Sarah would call. They'd talk for an hour, about everything and nothing. About his garden that never grew anything but tomatoes. About the game shows he watched. About Sarah's day at the hospital. Though she never shared the hard parts, never burdened him with a patient she couldn't save. On Sundays, Sarah would walk to her father's house for dinner. He'd make pot roast, the same recipes Sarah's mother used to make. They'd eat together at the small kitchen table, and for a few hours, the house wouldn't feel so empty. Her father would tell the same stories he always told. About growing up poor in Kentucky. About meeting Sarah's mother at a church picnic. About the day Sarah was born and how he cried because she was so small and perfect. Sarah would listen like she'd never heard the stories before. Because she knew that sometimes people retell stories not because they forgot they already told them, but because the stories are all they have left of the people they've lost. This was Sarah's life 6 months ago. Simple, predictable, unremarkable to anyone watching from the outside. But to Sarah, it was everything. It was stability. It was purpose. It was the quiet contentment of a life built on service and love, and showing up for the people who mattered. She didn't know that in 6 months, she'd be sitting in a doorway with nothing. She didn't know that everything she'd built could collapse so quickly, so completely, that she'd barely recognize herself in the mirror. She didn't know that the phone call that would destroy her life was coming on a Tuesday morning in April while she was at work, running a code on a patient who wouldn't survive no matter how hard they tried. The call came at 9:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. Sarah was in Trauma Bay 3, doing chest compressions on a 5-6-year-old man who'd collapsed at a construction site. His heart had stopped. They'd been working on him for 23 minutes. The doctor kept calling for more epinephrine. The respiratory therapist was bagging him. Another nurse was pushing medications. Sarah's arms burned from the compressions. You have to push hard enough to break ribs. Have to compress the chest 2 inches deep. 100 compressions per minute. Have to keep blood flowing to the brain even though the heart has given up. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it. You don't stop CPR to answer a phone. It buzzed again. And again. After 30 minutes, the doctor called it. Time of death. 9:47 a.m. Sarah stepped back from the body. Sweating, exhausted. Grief sitting heavy in her chest, even though she'd never met this man before today. She pulled off her gloves. Washed her hands. Checked her phone. 17 missed calls. All from her father's number. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Her father never called her at work. Never. He knew she was busy. That she couldn't always answer. If he needed something, he'd leave one voicemail and wait for her to call back. 17 calls meant something was very wrong. Sarah's hands shook as she called back. It rang once. A man's voice answered. Not her father. Is this Sarah Mitchell? Yes. Who is this? Where's my father? Ma'am, this is Sergeant Rodriguez with Riverside Police. Your father called 911 about 40 minutes ago. He's at Riverside Memorial. We found him collapsed in his home. Sarah ran, still in her scrubs, still wearing her badge. She ran through the halls of her own hospital, took the stairs instead of waiting for the elevator, burst into the emergency department where she worked every day. But this time, she wasn't the nurse, she was the family member, the one on the other side, the one who waited while strangers worked on someone she loved. They wouldn't let her in the room. Protocol. Family members can't be present during resuscitation, even if they're medical professionals, especially if they're medical professionals. So Sarah stood in the hallway, still breathing hard from running, and watched through the window as her coworkers, her friends, worked on her father. Dr. Harrison, who she'd worked beside for 8 years, was running the code, giving orders, checking monitors, making decisions. Lisa, who brought Sarah coffee every morning, was starting an IV. James, who told terrible jokes in the break room, was pushing medications. And on the gurney, her father, eyes closed, skin gray, unresponsive. Sarah knew what she was seeing. She'd seen it 100 times. A massive stroke, the kind that destroys, the kind that steals everything. After 45 minutes, they stabilized him enough to transfer to ICU. Dr. Harrison came out, still wearing his trauma gown, and Sarah knew from his face that the news was bad. "Sarah," he said gently, taking her hands, "it's a massive hemorrhagic stroke, left hemisphere. The bleeding is extensive." Sarah nodded. She knew what that meant, knew the statistics, knew that the left hemisphere controlled speech, logic, the ability to recognize loved ones. "Will he wake up?" she asked, though she already knew. Dr. Harrison's eyes were kind but honest. "I don't know. The next 72 hours are critical. But Sarah, even if he wakes up, the damage is severe. He'll never be the same. Never be the same." The words echoed in Sarah's head as she sat beside her father's ICU bed, holding his hand, begging him to squeeze her fingers, to open his eyes, to come back. He didn't. For 3 days, Sarah lived in that hospital, slept in the chair beside his bed, ate vending machine food, showered in the staff locker room. Her coworkers brought her clean scrubs, covered her shifts, told her to take all the time she needed. On day 4, her father opened his eyes. Sarah cried with relief. "Daddy, oh thank God, you're awake." But he looked at her with empty eyes. No recognition, no response. She squeezed his hand. "Daddy, it's me. It's Sarah. Can you hear me?" "Nothing." The neurologist explained it gently. Severe aphasia. Couldn't speak. Couldn't understand language. Right side paralysis. Couldn't walk. Couldn't use his right arm. Would need 24-hour care for the rest of his life. "What are his options?" Sarah asked, though her voice sounded far away, like it belonged to someone else. "Long-term care facility, or a live-in caregiver at home. But Miss Mitchell, that level of care is extremely expensive. Does your father have long-term care insurance?" Sarah shook her head. Her father had Social Security. That was it. Barely $1,400 a month. He owned his house outright, but the property taxes alone ate up most of his monthly income. The social worker sat down with Sarah and laid out the math. A nursing home cost $8,000 a month. Her father's Social Security would cover $1,400. That left $6,600 a month that someone had to pay. "What if I take care of him at home?" Sarah asked. The social worker's face was sympathetic. "That's admirable. But 24-hour care means you can't work. How will you support yourself?" "I'll figure it out," Sarah said, because what choice did she have? Let her father go to some underfunded state facility where he'd be just another body in a bed, where he'd die alone because Sarah couldn't afford better. No, he'd raised her alone after her mother died. Worked double shifts at the post office to pay for her nursing school. Never complained. Never made her feel like a burden. Now, it was her turn. Sarah made the decision that would change everything. She submitted her resignation to Riverside Memorial Hospital. Effective immediately. Her supervisor begged her to reconsider. "Take a leave of absence. We'll hold your position. But don't quit, Sarah. Please." But Sarah couldn't take a leave of absence. Her father needed care now. Couldn't wait for FMLA paperwork to process. Couldn't wait 3 months to see if he'd improve. So Sarah quit, cleaned out her locker, turned in her badge, said goodbye to coworkers who cried and hugged her, and promised to stay in touch, though they both knew most of them wouldn't. And Sarah brought her father home. The first month wasn't so bad. Sarah moved into her father's house. Easier than trying to transport him to her apartment every day. She set up his bedroom like a hospital room. Hospital bed rented from a medical supply company. Bedside commode. Medications organized in a pillbox. whiteboard on the wall to track his vitals. She bathed him, fed him, changed him when he couldn't make it to the commode in time, gave him his medications on schedule, did physical therapy exercises the hospital had taught her, moving his paralyzed limbs, trying to prevent contractures. She talked to him constantly even though he couldn't respond, told him about her day, read him the newspaper, played his favorite music, hoping that somewhere inside his broken brain he could hear her, could know he wasn't alone. The medical bills started arriving in week 2. The ambulance, $2,400. The emergency department, $8,900. The ICU stay, $67,000 for 3 days. The CT scans, the MRIs, the medications, the specialists, another $23,000. Total, $101,300. Her father had Medicare. It covered some, but not all. After Medicare paid their portion, Sarah's father owed $34,000. $34,000 that a retired postal worker with $1,200 in savings didn't have. The hospital sent payment plans, $500 a month for the next 6 years. Sarah signed the agreement, because what choice did she have? But $500 a month, plus property taxes, plus utilities, plus groceries, plus medical supplies meant Sarah's father's Social Security didn't cover even half of what was needed. Sarah had savings, $8,700. She'd been saving for years, not for anything specific, just being responsible, building a safety net. Month 1, Sarah spent $2,100 of her savings to cover what her father's income couldn't. Month 2, another $2,300. Her father developed a pressure ulcer that required special wound care supplies Medicare wouldn't cover. Month 3, $1,800. Plus, Sarah had to pay her own rent. The lease on her apartment was still in her name. She wasn't living there, but legally she was still responsible. By month 4, Sarah's savings were gone. All of it. 8 years of careful saving. Gone in 16 weeks. Sarah tried to get a job. Applied to work as a nurse part-time, night shifts while her father slept. But every interview ended the same way. Can you work weekends? No, I care for my father. Can you work holidays? No, I care for my father. Can you stay late if we're short-staffed? No, I care for my father. No one hired her. Can't blame them. They needed flexibility. Sarah had none to give. She applied for home health aide positions, medical assistant jobs, anything medical that paid. But without someone to watch her father, she couldn't work traditional hours. Month 5, Sarah stopped paying her rent, couldn't afford both her apartment and her father's expenses. She chose her father. The eviction notice came in week 3 of month 5. 30 days to vacate. Sarah let it happen. Didn't fight it. What was the point? She wasn't living there anyway. And she couldn't afford it even if she wanted to. When the 30 days were up, Sarah's landlord changed the locks. Everything Sarah owned, furniture, clothes, photographs, her entire life locked inside an apartment she could no longer access. She called the landlord, begged for access to get her belongings. You owe me $4,200 in back rent, the landlord said. Pay me, and you can have your stuff. Otherwise, it's getting donated or thrown away. Sarah didn't have $4,200. She didn't have $42, so her belongings were gone. Everything except what she'd brought to her father's house when she moved in. A suitcase of clothes, her nursing textbooks, a photo album. That's what remained of Sarah Mitchell's life. What fit in one suitcase. Month 6 arrived like an executioner. Sarah's father got pneumonia, a complication of being bedridden. His weakened body couldn't fight it. Sarah nursed him at home as long as she could. Antibiotics, breathing treatments, suctioning, around-the-clock care. But on a Saturday morning, his fever spiked to 104. His oxygen saturation dropped to 82%. His lips turned blue. Sarah called 911. They took him back to Riverside Memorial, back to the ICU. Intubated him because he couldn't breathe on his own. The doctors were honest. His body is shutting down. The pneumonia is severe. His kidneys are failing. Even if we save him from this, his quality of life will be non-existent. They were recommending comfort care, hospice. Let him go peacefully instead of prolonging suffering. Sarah sat beside her father's bed, holding his hand, watching the ventilator breathe for him. And she knew they were right. She signed the papers. Authorized comfort care only. They extubated him, gave him morphine for comfort, turned off all the machines except the one that monitored his heart rate. Sarah held his hand and whispered, "It's okay, Daddy. You can rest now. You don't have to fight anymore. I love you. I'm so sorry I couldn't save you." His heart rate slowed. 80, 60, 40, 20. Then a flat line. A tone that meant it was over. Time of death, 3:42 p.m. Sarah memorized it. The exact moment her father stopped existing. She sat there for an hour, just holding his hand, feeling it grow cold, not wanting to let go, because letting go meant accepting he was really gone. A nurse someone Sarah didn't know came in gently. "I'm so sorry for your loss. We need to prepare the body. Would you like a few more minutes?" Sarah nodded. A few more minutes. As if a few more minutes could possibly be enough. Finally, she stood, kissed her father's forehead, whispered, "I love you," one last time, and walked out of the hospital where she used to work, where she used to save lives, where her father had just died despite everything she'd done to save him. The funeral cost $6,700. The funeral director was kind but firm. "This is the most basic package we offer. Cremation, a simple urn, a brief memorial service at our chapel." Sarah didn't have $6,700. Didn't even have $670. "Do you have life insurance?" the funeral director asked gently. Sarah shook her head. Her father's life insurance policy had lapsed years ago when he couldn't afford the premiums anymore. "Family who can help?" Sarah shook her head again. No siblings, no aunts or uncles. Her mother's family had been small, and they'd all passed. Her father's family had been estranged for decades. It was just Sarah, and Sarah had nothing. The funeral director sighed. "We have a hardship program. We can work with you on payments, but we need at least $2,000 down." Sarah opened a credit card, her fourth one, the only one that wasn't maxed out. Signed paperwork promising to pay $200 a month for the next 3 years. The funeral was small. 10 people, mostly her father's elderly neighbors who remembered him from before the stroke. They hugged Sarah and told her they were sorry for her loss and asked what she'd do now. Sarah didn't have an answer. After the funeral, Sarah had no reason to stay at her father's house. The house would go through probate, eventually be sold to pay his medical debts. But that would take months. For now, Sarah lived there like a ghost haunting her own life. She had no job, no income, no savings. Credit cards maxed out, medical debt in collections, funeral debt looming. The math was brutal. She needed a job immediately. But she'd been out of nursing for 6 months. Her certifications were about to lapse. To renew them, she'd need continuing education credits that cost money she didn't have. Sarah applied everywhere. Restaurants, retail stores, call centers, anywhere that might hire her. But every application asked for an address, a phone number, references. Sarah's phone had been shut off 2 weeks ago. Couldn't afford the bill. She used the address of her father's house, but she knew that wouldn't last. Once the estate processed, she'd have to leave. Week 1 of job hunting produced nothing. No calls, no interviews. Week 2, the property tax bill arrived. $3,200. Due in 30 days, or the county would start foreclosure proceedings. Sarah couldn't pay it. The estate would have to deal with it. Week 3, the utilities were shut off. No electricity, no water. The house became unlivable. Sarah packed her suitcase, the same one she'd lived out of for 6 months, and she walked away from her father's house for the last time. She had $14 in her wallet. No phone, no car. She'd sold it 3 months ago for $800 that immediately went to medical bills. No place to go. Sarah Mitchell, registered nurse with 12 years of experience, was officially homeless. People don't see homeless people. Not really. Sarah learned this within the first week. She'd walk down streets she used to drive every day, past her old hospital, past the grocery store where she used to shop, past the coffee shop where she used to grab lattes on her way to work. and people would look right through her, like she wasn't there, like she'd become a ghost. Former coworkers walked past her, people she'd worked beside for years, people who'd cried when she resigned, people who'd promised to stay in touch. They'd walk right past, their eyes sliding over her like she was furniture, not worth seeing. Sarah understood. She looked different now. Her clothes were wrinkled, unwashed. Her hair was messy, unbrushed. She carried her belongings in a tattered suitcase with a broken wheel. She looked homeless, and homeless people are invisible. Sarah tried sleeping in shelters at first, but shelters had rules. Be in line by 6 p.m. or lose your spot. Out by 6 a.m. No belongings left during the day. Random searches for drugs and weapons. Crowded rooms that smelled like desperation and defeat. After 3 nights, Sarah stopped going. The shelters were full of people who'd given up, who'd accepted homelessness as permanent, who fought over mattresses and stole from each other. Sarah wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. She found other places. Under bridges, when the weather was mild. In 24-hour laundromats, where she could pretend to be waiting for laundry while actually trying to sleep in a plastic chair. In the doorway of the old Morrison Street clinic abandoned 3 years ago, boarded up, forgotten by everyone except people who needed walls to block wind. The clinic doorway became Sarah's spot. Other homeless people respected territorial claims. This doorway was hers. She had 3 blankets, all thin, donated from a church that handed them out on Sundays. She had a plastic tarp to keep rain off. She had her suitcase with 3 changes of clothes that she washed in public restroom sinks. And she had her pride, though it was wearing thinner every day. Sarah tried to get her nursing job back. Showed up at Riverside Memorial's HR department. Asked to speak to whoever was in charge of hiring. The HR director, a woman named Patricia, whom Sarah had met at hospital functions, agreed to see her. Patricia's face showed shock when Sarah walked into her office. Sarah knew what she saw. Someone who used to be professional, put together, competent, now looking exhausted, unwashed, desperate. Sarah, Patricia said carefully, I heard about your father. I'm so sorry. Thank you, Sarah said, sitting in the chair across from Patricia's desk. Trying to sit with dignity, even though her clothes were wrinkled and she hadn't showered in 3 days. I'm here to ask about returning to work. Patricia's face fell. Sarah, I would love to help you. But there are complications. What complications? Patricia pulled up Sarah's file on her computer. Your nursing certifications have lapsed. To renew them, you'd need to complete continuing education hours and pay the renewal fees. That's about $400 total. I can do that, Sarah said, though she had no idea how she'd come up with $400. And, Patricia continued gently, we require all employees to have a permanent address and a working phone number. For scheduling purposes, emergency contact purposes. Sarah's mouth went dry. I'm in between addresses right now, but I'll have something soon. Patricia's eyes were kind but firm. Sarah, I know your situation. I've heard, and I'm not trying to be cruel. But our policies are clear. We can't hire someone without stable housing. But I became homeless because I was caring for my father, Sarah said, her voice rising despite her efforts to stay calm. I was being a nurse. Isn't that what we do? Care for people even when it costs us everything. Patricia looked down at her desk. I understand, and what you did for your father was beautiful. But Sarah, how can you care for patients if you're struggling to care for yourself? You need stability before you can return to nursing. I need a job to get stability. I know. It's a terrible catch-22, but I can't change hospital policy. Sarah stood up. She wouldn't beg. She still had that much dignity left. Thank you for your time, she said quietly, and walked out. Behind her, Patricia called, Sarah, wait. But Sarah didn't wait. She walked through the hospital lobby, past people in scrubs who'd been her friends, past the emergency department where she'd worked for 12 years, past the life she used to have. And she knew she'd never get it back. Homelessness has a rhythm. Sarah learned it quickly. Wake at dawn when police start their rounds, moving homeless people along from wherever they've settled for the night. Find a public bathroom, library, fast food restaurant if they don't notice you're not buying anything. Wash face, brush teeth, Try to look presentable. Spend the day moving. Never stay in one place too long, or security will ask you to leave. Walk the streets. Sit in parks. Rest in library, reading rooms. Exist without purpose, without destination, just existing. Around 4 p.m., start thinking about food. The mission serves dinner at 5 p.m. St. Mary's Church has a food pantry on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The Salvation Army has a soup kitchen that opens at 6 p.m. Eat whatever is offered. Don't complain. Don't ask for seconds unless they're offered. Be grateful, because hunger is worse than pride. After dinner, find your sleeping spot before dark. Claim your space. Set up your blankets. Settle in for a night of uncomfortable, anxious half-sleep where you wake at every sound, never fully resting, never fully safe. Wake at dawn. Repeat. This was Sarah's life now. No purpose. No future. Just survival. Day by day, meal by meal, hour by hour. But Sarah still carried something inside her. Something that hadn't died, even though everything else had. She was still a nurse. She couldn't turn it off. Couldn't stop seeing injuries and illnesses that needed treatment. Couldn't stop her mind from assessing, diagnosing, planning interventions. One afternoon, Sarah was sitting in a park when she saw a man collapse 50 feet away. Other people kept walking, assuming he was drunk or high. Assuming he was just another homeless person and therefore not their problem. But Sarah saw the way he fell. The way his body seized. The way his eyes rolled back. She ran to him, dropped to her knees, checked his pulse weak and thready, checked his breathing shallow and irregular, looked at his lips blue from lack of oxygen. Someone call 911. Sarah shouted. A woman with a stroller pulled out her phone, dialing while keeping her distance. Sarah tilted the man's head back, opening his airway. He started breathing better immediately. She checked his pockets, found a medic alert bracelet. Epilepsy. The seizure had stopped, but he was in the postictal phase. Confused, disoriented, potentially dangerous to himself. Sarah stayed with him, talking calmly, keeping him from hurting himself, monitoring his vital signs with just her hands and eyes and 12 years of experience. When the paramedics arrived, Sarah gave report like she'd done 1,000 times. Concise, clinical, professional. John Doe, approximately 35 years old. Witnessed seizure lasting approximately 2 minutes. Postictal state. Medic alert bracelet indicates epilepsy. Respiration shallow but improving. Pulse 98 and regular. No visible injuries. The paramedics looked at her with respect. You a nurse? Sarah hesitated. I was. They loaded the man into the ambulance. One paramedic turned back. You saved his life. If he'd been seizing alone, he could have choked or hit his head. You did good. Sarah watched them drive away. She'd saved a life. With nothing but her training in her hands, she was homeless. She was broken. She'd lost everything, but she was still a nurse. November arrived with the kind of cold that makes your bones ache. Sarah had been homeless for 3 months. 3 months of sleeping in doorways. 3 months of eating at soup kitchens. 3 months of being invisible to everyone except other homeless people who understood what it meant to have nothing. She'd settled into a routine. The Morrison Street clinic doorway was hers. 3 blankets, rotated depending on how cold it got. A plastic tarp for rain. Her suitcase, now held together with duct tape, held everything she owned. Other homeless people knew her, respected her. Word had spread that Sarah was a nurse. People came to her with injuries and illnesses. She treated them with whatever supplies she could find or beg from churches. Cleaned wounds with bottled water and soap. Bandaged cuts with strips torn from old t-shirts. Gave advice about infections and when someone needed to go to the ER, even if they couldn't pay. Sarah gave away half her food. To people who looked hungrier than she felt. To mothers with children. To elderly people whose bodies couldn't handle hunger the way younger bodies could. She shared her blankets with people shivering in the cold. Gave her coat to a woman with a baby when temperatures dropped below freezing. Sarah was homeless, but she was still caring for people. Still being a nurse in the only way she could. The blizzard warning came over a radio playing in a corner store where Sarah sometimes stood near the door, soaking in the heat that poured out whenever customers entered. Historic snowfall. expected tonight. Temperatures dropping to -15 degrees, with wind chill, making it feel like -40. This is a life-threatening weather event. Homeless shelters are opening emergency overflow capacity. If you are without shelter, seek help immediately. Sarah checked the time, 4 p.m. The shelters would be full already. People had been lining up since noon. She walked quickly back to the Morrison Street clinic doorway. Her spot. She needed to prepare. Sarah had 3 blankets. All thin, all worn, all completely inadequate for -40-degree weather. She also had experience. Knew that the key to surviving extreme cold was blocking wind, preserving core body heat, and staying awake. Falling asleep in cold like this meant hypothermia. Hypothermia meant death. By 5 p.m., the snow started. Light at first. Pretty, even. Big fluffy flakes that stuck to everything. By 6 p.m., the temperature had dropped 20 degrees. The snow came down heavier. Wind picked up, howling through the empty streets. By 7 p.m., Sarah was wedged into the deepest corner of the fenned clinic doorway. All 3 blankets wrapped around her body, a plastic bag over her head to keep snow off. Her hands tucked under her arms, her knees pulled to her chest. She was already cold, shivering, and the worst of the storm hadn't even hit yet. Sarah prayed, not because she expected an answer. She'd prayed a lot in the past year and hadn't seen much evidence that anyone was listening. But she prayed anyway, because what else could she do? God, if you're there, if you're listening, please get me through this night. I don't want to die in a doorway. I don't want to freeze alone. Please, I'm trying so hard. I haven't given up. Please don't give up on me. The temperature kept dropping. Sarah's fingers went numb first, then her toes. Then her face felt like it was burning and freezing at the same time. She tried to stay awake, recited nursing mnemonics in her head. ABC, airway, breathing, circulation. Monomorphine, oxygen, nitroglycerin, aspirin for heart attacks. Rice rest, ice, compression, elevation for sprains. Anything to keep her mind active, because falling asleep meant dying. Around 9 p.m., Sarah heard it, the sound of an engine, struggling, sputtering, dying. She lifted her head, peering out from her blankets. 50 feet down the street, a motorcycle, a big Harley-Davidson, was coasting to a stop. The engine cut out completely. The rider tried to restart it. Once, twice. Nothing. The rider climbed off the bike, stumbling. Even from a distance, Sarah could see he was in trouble. Moving too slowly. Unsteady on his feet. Stage 2 hypothermia, Sarah's nurse brain said automatically. Confusion. Poor coordination. Slurred speech. Dangerous. The man wore a leather jacket and jeans. No gloves. No face protection. His hands, even from 50 feet away, Sarah could see were blue. He tried his phone. The glow of the screen lit his face briefly. But out here, in this storm, cell service was probably dead. And even if it wasn't, who would come get him in? Weather like this? The man looked around desperately. Every building was dark. Locked. Boarded up. This part of Riverside was industrial. Nothing open after 5 p.m. even on good days. He started walking. Not toward any specific destination. Just walking. Aimless. Confused. Sarah recognized the signs. She'd seen them in the ER 100 times. Hypothermia causes confusion. Makes people do irrational things. Makes them walk away from shelter. Makes them take off their clothes because their confused brain tells them they're overheating. Stage 3 hypothermia was next. Loss of consciousness. Cardiac arrest. Death. This man was going to die. Right there on Morrison Street. He'd collapse soon. The snow would cover him. Nobody would find him until spring thaw. Just another frozen body. Another statistic. Another person who died alone while the world slept warm in their beds. Sarah could stay in her doorway. Could tell herself it wasn't her problem. She was barely surviving herself. She had nothing to give. She was cold and hungry and exhausted and hanging on by a thread. Nobody would blame her for staying put, for protecting herself, for choosing her own survival over a stranger's. But Sarah Mitchell was a nurse, and nurses don't watch people die when they can do something about it. Sarah stood up, Her body protested. Every joint ached from cold. Her legs were stiff. Her fingers barely worked. But she stood up, wrapped her blankets around her shoulders, and called out into the howling wind. "Hey! Over here!" The man turned toward her voice. Slowly, like moving through water, he squinted through the snow, trying to see where the voice had come from. His face was red and raw from wind. Ice crusted his beard. Sarah waved her arm. "Come here. Get out of the wind." He stumbled toward her. Each step was an effort. His boots dragged through snow that was already 6 inches deep and getting deeper. When he finally reached the doorway, he collapsed against the wall. His whole body shook violently. Uncontrolled shivering. Stage 2 hypothermia confirmed. Sea cold. He managed through chattering teeth. The word came out slurred. His speech was affected. Not a good sign. Sarah grabbed his arm. His skin was iced through the leather jacket and pulled him fully into the doorway, into the small space that blocked some of the wind. Up close, she could assess him properly. Male, approximately 50 years old. Gray beard, now crusted with ice and snow. Face red and raw, showing early frostbite on his cheeks and nose. Hands had gone from blue to white, severe frostbite, probably 2nd degree. Core body temperature dangerously low based on his level of confusion and the severity of his shivering. "What's your name?" Sarah asked, her voice carrying the calm authority she'd used in 1,000 emergency situations. Marcus," he stammered. His teeth chattered so hard Sarah worried he'd crack them. "Okay, Marcus. Listen to me. I'm Sarah. I'm a nurse. You have hypothermia. Moderate to severe. We need to get you warm. Slowly. Do you understand?" Marcus nodded, but his eyes were glassy, confused. He wasn't fully processing. Sarah went into nurse mode. 12 years of training took over, pushing past her own cold, her own discomfort, her own exhaustion. First priority, get him out of wet clothes. But she had no dry clothes to offer. So instead, she'd have to work with what she had. She unwrapped one of her blankets, the thickest one, though thick was relative when you're homeless, and wrapped it around Marcus's shoulders. Then the second blanket, wrapped it around his legs. Then her coat, the only coat she had, the one keeping her alive in this blizzard. She took it off and draped it over Marcus's torso. "No," Marcus protested weakly, trying to push the coat away. "You'll freeze." "I'm already cold," Sarah said matter-of-factly. "But you're colder, and you're in shock. Your body isn't regulating temperature properly anymore. Let me work." She positioned them so they were sitting side by side, their backs against the door, sharing body heat. Sarah kept the thinnest blanket for herself and used her body to block the wind from hitting Marcus directly. She knew the protocol. Hypothermia treatment starts with stopping further heat loss, then gradual rewarming. Too fast, and you can cause cardiac arrest. Too slow, and the cold kills them anyway. It's a careful balance. Sarah monitored him constantly. Checked his pulse by pressing her fingers numb as they were against his neck. Thready but present. Maybe 90 beats per minute. Too fast. His body was working overtime, trying to generate heat. Watched his breathing. Shallow but regular. 20 breaths per minute. Also elevated. Also concerning. Kept him talking. "Marcus, I need you to stay awake. Tell me about yourself. Where were you headed?" Marcus's words came slowly at first. Slurred, confused. But Sarah kept prompting, kept asking questions, kept forcing his brain to work. "Brother's funeral." Marcus finally managed. 3 states away. Got caught in the ski storm. Phone died. Bike died. Thought I was going to die out there. "You're not going to die," Sarah said firmly. "I've got you. Just stay with me." For the next hour, Sarah did what she'd done in countless emergency situations. She assessed. She monitored. She intervened. She kept a dying man alive with nothing but 3 thin blankets, 1 coat, her own body heat, and 12 years of nursing knowledge. Gradually, Marcus's shivering became less violent. His speech became clearer. His eyes became more focused. "You're saving my life," he whispered. "Just doing what I can," Sarah said. But inside, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Purpose. She was being a nurse again, helping someone, Making a difference. Who are you? Marcus asked, his words less slurred now. Why are you out here in this storm? Sarah hesitated. Then, because what did it matter anymore? She told him. Everything. Her father's stroke. Quitting her job to care for him. The medical bills. Losing her apartment. Becoming homeless. Losing her father. Being unable to get her job back. The whole humiliating story of how a registered nurse with 12 years of experience ended up sleeping in a doorway with 3 blankets and nothing else. Marcus listened in silence. As she talked, his shivering slowed. His mind cleared. The hypothermia was reversing. Slowly, but definitely. When Sarah finished her story, Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You're a nurse." "I was a nurse." "No." Marcus's voice was stronger now, more firm. "You are a nurse. Nurses don't stop being nurses just because they don't have a hospital to work in. You just saved a dying man with 3 blankets and a doorway. You gave me your only coat. You're risking your own life to keep me alive. That's more nursing than most people in hospitals do." Sarah felt tears freeze on her cheeks. "I couldn't just watch you." "Most people would have," Marcus said quietly. "Most people would have stayed hidden, stayed safe, let the stranger freeze. But you didn't. You saw someone in need, and you helped. Even though you have nothing, even though helping me puts you at risk." Sarah didn't know what to say. She just sat there, shivering in her single thin blanket while Marcus was wrapped in everything else she owned, and she felt something shift inside her chest. Maybe she hadn't lost everything. Maybe she'd lost her job, her home, her possessions, her stability. But she hadn't lost who she was. She was still Sarah Mitchell. Still a nurse. Still someone who saw suffering and tried to stop it. "Who are you?" Sarah asked. "I mean, what do you do?" Marcus managed a small smile. "I'm a Hell's Angel. Been writing for 30 years. Vice president of my chapter." Sarah had heard of the Hell's Angels. Motorcycle club. People were afraid of them, thought they were dangerous. Criminals. But sitting here, sharing warmth, with this man who'd been dying in the street, Sarah didn't see a criminal. She saw a person. Someone's son, someone's brother. Someone who was mourning a loss and got caught in a storm and almost died. She saw a human being. That's all. Marcus continued talking, his voice getting stronger. "The Hell's Angels. We have a code. Brotherhood. Loyalty. We take care of our own. We don't forget people who help us. We don't leave anybody behind." He looked at Sarah with eyes that were clear now, focused, serious. "Sarah, I need you to understand something. What you did tonight, giving your warmth to a stranger when you had almost nothing, that's not going to be forgotten." "It's okay," Sarah said. "I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because it was right, because I'm a nurse. Because I can't watch people die when I can do something to help." Marcus smiled. "I know. That's exactly why it matters." They sat together through the night. The storm raged around them. Wind howled, snow piled up. Temperature dropped even further. But in that doorway, pressed together for warmth, wrapped in 3 thin blankets that weren't nearly enough, but somehow were just barely sufficient, they survived. Marcus told Sarah about the Brotherhood, about how the Hell's Angels weren't what the media portrayed. Yes, some members had criminal pasts, but most were just men who'd found family in each other. Veterans, workers, fathers, men who lived by a code that valued loyalty above everything. He told her about riding across the country, the freedom of the open road, the brotherhood of the club, the charity work they did that nobody ever reported because good news doesn't sell papers. Sarah told Marcus about nursing, about the patients she'd saved, about the ones she couldn't save, about her father and how hard she'd fought to keep him alive and how she'd failed anyway. They talked about loss, about grief, about how life can take everything from you and you have to decide whether to give up or keep fighting. "I'm so tired of fighting," Sarah admitted as the hours stretched toward dawn. "I've been fighting for a year, fighting to save my father, fighting to keep my job, fighting to keep my apartment, fighting to survive, and I keep losing." "You haven't lost," Marcus said. "You're still here, still fighting, still helping people even though you have nothing. That's not losing, Sarah. That's strength most people never discover." I don't feel strong. I feel broken. Broken things can be fixed, Marcus said. And sometimes broken things, when they're fixed, they're stronger than they were before. Somewhere around 3 a.m., Marcus's phone, which had died earlier, suddenly buzzed. A tiny bit of charge had returned as the phone warmed up in Marcus's jacket pocket. He pulled it out. 1 bar of battery. Barely enough for a call. I need to call my club, Marcus said. Let them know I'm alive. They'll come get me. Sarah nodded. You should call. They're probably worried. Marcus dialed. The call connected. Sarah heard a male voice answer, urgent and concerned. Marcus? Where the hell are you? We've been trying to reach you for hours. The storm. I'm alive, Reaper, Marcus said. His voice was steady now. Strong. The hypothermia had reversed. Sarah's interventions had worked. I'm on Morrison Street. Old clinic building. Bike died. I almost died too. We're coming, the voice Reaper said immediately. Stay where you are. We'll be there in 2 hours. Soon as the roads are passable. Reaper, Marcus said. I'm not alone. There's someone you need to meet. Someone who saved my life. A pause. Who? Marcus looked at Sarah. A nurse. A homeless nurse who gave me everything she had to keep me alive. Her name is Sarah Mitchell. Another pause. Longer this time. We'll be there soon. Marcus hung up. Looked at Sarah. They're coming. Good, Sarah said. You need to get somewhere warm. Get checked out properly. Make sure there's no permanent damage from the good. Frostbite. What about you? Marcus asked. Where will you go? Sarah shrugged. I'll be fine. I always am. No, Marcus said firmly. You won't be fine. It's still -30 degrees out there. You gave me your coat. You gave me your blankets. You've been sitting here with almost nothing to keep yourself warm because you were keeping me alive. I'm a nurse, Sarah said simply. That's what we do. Marcus shook his head. Sarah, you need to understand something. What you did tonight, it matters. And my brothers, they're going to want to thank you. Properly. I don't need thanks. I know you don't, Marcus interrupted. That's not the point. The point is, you're not going to be alone anymore. You're not going to be invisible anymore. You saved one of ours. That makes you one of ours, whether you know it or not. Sarah didn't understand what he meant. She thought he was just being grateful. Thought that once he was safe and warm and with his club, he'd forget about her. People always did. She didn't know that Marcus had made a phone call that would change her life forever. She didn't know that at 3 a.m., while she sat in a frozen doorway, thinking she'd go right back to being invisible as soon as Marcus left, a message was going out across the entire Hells Angels network. She didn't know that from California to Maine, from Florida to Washington, bikers were being woken up, told about a nurse who saved one of their brothers, told to contribute whatever they could. She didn't know that the Hells Angels had a code: nobody who saves one of ours gets left behind. And she definitely didn't know that in approximately 4 hours, 400 motorcycles would descend on Morrison Street like an army. All for her. When dawn broke, the storm had passed. The world was buried under 3 feet of snow. Everything was white, silent, pristine. The kind of beautiful morning that happens after nature has reminded humans who's really in charge. The sun rose, weak and pale, but it was light. They'd survived the night. Marcus stood up slowly, testing his legs. His movements were stiff but functional. The frostbite on his hands and face would need treatment, but he'd likely keep all his fingers and toes. Thanks to Sarah, his motorcycle was completely buried. Just a white mound in the street that might have been anything. He tried to start it anyway. Dead. Battery frozen solid. It wouldn't be running anytime soon. Marcus pulled out his phone. It had enough charge for one more call. He dialed Reaper. We're 20 minutes out, Reaper said immediately. Roads are a mess, but we're coming. You okay? I'm alive because of Sarah, Marcus said. Reaper, you need to understand. She's homeless. She had 3 blankets. She gave me 2. Gave me her only coat. Sat in -30-degree weather with almost nothing, keeping me alive. She's a registered nurse. 12 years experience. Lost everything caring for her dying father. Reaper was quiet for a moment. We're bringing the whole charter. Marcus. Everyone who could ride. And we made some calls last night. This nurse of yours, she's about to learn what family means. Marcus hung up and turned to Sarah. She was gathering her blankets, folding them carefully, preparing to move on with her life like nothing had happened. Sarah, Marcus said, please stay. Just a little longer. My brothers are coming. They want to meet you. I really should go, Sarah said. The daytime means people will be out. Business owners. They don't like homeless people hanging around their buildings. Please, Marcus said. 1 hour. Give me 1 hour. They're bringing help. Something in his voice made Sarah pause. What kind of help? The kind you need, Marcus said simply. Please trust me. Sarah didn't know why, but she nodded. Maybe because Marcus had been kind to her. Maybe because she was too tired to argue. Maybe because some part of her, buried deep beneath months of defeat, still dared to hope. They waited. Marcus stood near the street, watching for his brothers. Sarah sat in the doorway, wrapped in her thin blankets, feeling the cold seep into her bones now that the adrenaline of saving Marcus had faded. Then, she heard it. That sound. That deep, rolling thunder of engines. At first, Sarah thought it was snowplows. The city clearing the roads after the blizzard. But the sound didn't pass. It grew louder, stronger, coming from multiple directions at once. Sarah stood up, her heart suddenly pounding. Marcus smiled. They're here. From the east, motorcycles appeared. A line of them, riding carefully through the snow-covered streets. 10, 20, 30, from the west more. Another 20, from the north and south. They kept coming. They converged on Morrison Street like a moving wall of chrome and leather and rumbling engines. The sound echoed off the empty buildings. Snow sprayed up from their tires. They filled the street, row after row, lining up in perfect formation. Sarah stood frozen in the doorway, her mouth open as she counted. 50, 100, 200. They kept coming. 300, 350. Finally, the last group pulled in. Sarah stopped counting at 400. 400 Hell's Angels motorcycles, filling Morrison Street from end to end. The engines cut off one by one until the street fell silent, except for the sound of boots hitting pavement as riders dismounted. Sarah's legs felt weak. Her heart hammered in her chest. She didn't understand what was happening. Why were they all here? A man stepped forward from the front line of bikes. Tall, maybe 55 years old, with a gray beard and eyes that missed nothing. He wore a leather vest covered in patches. On the back, in bold letters, President. He walked straight to Marcus. They embraced. The kind of hug men give when they thought they'd lost each other. Brother, the man said. His voice was deep, authoritative. You scared the hell out of us. I know, Reaper, Marcus said. I'm sorry. I should have checked the weather. Before I left. Reaper pulled back, looked Marcus over. Saw the frostbite on his hands and face. You need a hospital. I will. But first, Marcus turned to Sarah. She was still standing in the doorway, looking small and overwhelmed and utterly confused. Reaper, Marcus said, his voice carrying across the silent street. This is Sarah Mitchell. She's the nurse who saved my life. 400 pairs of eyes turned to look at Sarah. She felt exposed, vulnerable, terrified. Reaper walked toward her slowly, deliberately. His boots crunched in the snow. Sarah wanted to run, but she had nowhere to go. So she stood there, shaking, as this imposing man approached. Reaper stopped 3 feet away, studied her. Took in her thin coat. No. Wait, that was Marcus's coat. Marcus was wearing her coat. Took in her worn clothes, her tired face, the 3 thin blankets that were all she owned. Ma'am, Reaper said quietly, is it true? Did you save Marcus's life last night? Sarah's voice came out. Small. I just did what anyone would do. No. Reaper's voice was firm, but not unkind. That's not what anyone would do. Most people would have stayed hidden, would have protected themselves, would have let a stranger freeze. But you didn't. You gave him your warmth, your blankets, your coat. You risked your own life to save his. Sarah didn't know what to say. Tears started running down her face. She was so tired, so cold, so confused about why 400 bikers were looking at her. Another man stepped forward, older, carrying a leather folder. "We made some calls last night, Sarah. After Marcus told us about you. We know who you are. Sarah Mitchell, registered nurse. 12 years at Riverside Memorial Hospital. Perfect record. Multiple Employee of the Month awards. Glowing reviews from patients and doctors." Sarah's breath caught. "How did you—" "We have connections everywhere," the man said. "We also know about your father. About the stroke. About you quitting your job to care for him. About the medical bills. About losing your apartment. About becoming homeless." Sarah felt naked, exposed. They knew everything. All her failures. All her shame. "We know you tried to get your job back," another biker said, stepping forward. "We know they turned you down because you don't have an address." Reaper spoke again. "Sarah, the Hells Angels have a code. It's simple. We take care of our own. And anyone who saves one of ours becomes one of ours. Forever." Sarah shook her head. I'm not one of you. I don't even know you." "You know Marcus," Reaper said. "And that's all it takes. You saw a man dying in a blizzard, and you saved him. You gave everything you had, which was almost nothing, to keep him alive. You're a nurse who lost everything because you chose compassion over self-preservation. That's exactly who we want in our family." He nodded to someone in the crowd. A pickup truck pulled forward through the gathered motorcycles. Its bed was filled with boxes, clothes, food, blankets, real blankets, thick winter blankets, a brand new winter coat, still with tags on it. More bikers stepped forward, carrying things. A sleeping bag rated for -40 degrees. A backpack filled with toiletries. New boots. Socks. Everything Sarah had been surviving without. Another biker brought forward an envelope. Thick. Heavy. Reaper took it and held it out to Sarah. "This is $187,000. Collected from chapters across the entire country since 3 a.m. this morning when Marcus called us. Every brother and sister in the Hells Angels network contributed. Some gave $20. Some gave $500. Some gave more. All of it is yours." Sarah couldn't breathe. Couldn't process. $187,000. That was impossible. "There's more," Reaper continued. "We contacted Riverside Memorial Hospital. Told them what you did. Told them who you are. They want you back, Sarah. Full-time. They're reinstating you immediately. They're paying for your certification renewals. And they're giving you a $10,000 signing bonus to cover first and last month's rent and deposit on an apartment." Sarah's legs gave out. She sank to her knees in the snow. But Reaper wasn't done. He pulled out a leather vest from his jacket. Black leather. Patches on it. On the back, in bold letters, "Honorary Angel. Sarah Doc Mitchell." "Your family now, Sarah," Reaper said, his voice thick with emotion. "Forever. You need anything, a place to stay, food, protection, help, someone to talk to at 3 inches the morning you call us. We don't forget. We don't abandon our own. That's the code." Marcus knelt beside her, put his hand on her shoulder. "You saved me with 3 blankets and a doorway. Now, let us save you." Sarah looked around at 400 men and women on motorcycles. People society feared. People she'd been taught to avoid. People who looked dangerous, tough, intimidating. But they'd traveled through a blizzard. They'd woken up at 3 a.m. to contribute money. They'd mobilized an entire national organization because a homeless nurse had saved one of their brothers. They saw her, really saw her, when the rest of the world had made her invisible. Sarah Mitchell, who hadn't cried in months because she'd learned crying solved nothing, broke down completely. She sobbed. Great, heaving sobs that shook her entire body. Months of grief and fear and exhaustion poured out of her. And 400 Hells Angels stood in respectful silence, letting her grieve, letting her release, giving her space to feel everything she'd been holding inside. When Sarah finally looked up, her face wet with tears, she whispered, "Why? Why would you do this for me?" Reaper smiled gently. "Because you did it for Marcus. Because you're a nurse who never stopped caring even when you had nothing. Because you saw a dying stranger and chose his life over your own comfort. Because that's who you are. And we protect people like that." Dorothy, the woman who had come with the group, stepped forward. She was older, maybe 60, with kind eyes. Sweetheart, real angels don't wear wings. They wear whatever they have on when someone needs help. You're an angel, and angels belong with angels. Sarah looked at the vest Reaper was holding. Honorary Angel, Sarah Doc Mitchell. Doc. They'd given her a road name. Made her part of the family. Put it on, Marcus said softly. Sarah stood on shaking legs. Reaper helped her into the vest. It fit perfectly. The leather was soft, worn in, comfortable. On the front, patches that told a story. A medical cross. A patch that said Lifesaver. Another that said Family Forever. The 400 Hells Angels erupted in applause and cheers. Engines revved. Horns honked. The sound echoed through Morrison Street like thunder. Sarah stood there, wearing a Hells Angels vest, surrounded by 400 people who'd claimed her as family, holding an envelope with $187,000, knowing she had her nursing job back. And for the first time in a year, Sarah Mitchell felt something she thought was dead forever. She felt hope. 3 months later, Sarah Mitchell stood in the emergency department of Riverside Memorial Hospital, wearing navy blue scrubs with her name embroidered on the pocket. She just finished a 12-hour shift, saved 2 lives, 1 heart attack victim, 1 child who'd stopped breathing. Just another day for Nurse Mitchell. But when she clocked out and walked to the employee parking lot, she smiled at what she saw. A car. Her car. A used Honda Civic the Hells Angels had helped her buy. Reliable. Paid in full. In her pocket, keys to an apartment. A real apartment with heat and hot water and a bed and a kitchen. Her name on the lease. Her furniture inside. Her photos on the walls. On her phone, a text from Reaper. Ride tomorrow, 10 a.m. You coming, Doc? Sarah texted back. Wouldn't miss it. Every Saturday, Sarah rode with the Hells Angels. Not on her own bike, she was still learning, but on the back of Marcus's or Reaper's. They'd go to charity events, fundraisers for veterans, toy drives for kids, food distributions for homeless people. Sarah ran a free clinic now, every Friday night at the old Morrison Street clinic, the same building where she'd sheltered Marcus. The Angels had bought it, renovated it, turned it into a place where people who had nothing could get medical care. No insurance required, no address required, no questions asked. Just help. Sarah staffed it. The Angels funded it. Together, they saved lives. She still saw homeless people every day. And now, she stopped. Every time. Gave them food, gave them money, gave them dignity. Talked to them like humans instead of invisible obstacles. Because Sarah remembered, would always remember, what it felt like to be invisible. What it felt like to have the world look through you. What it felt like to have nothing. And she'd never forget who saw her when she was invisible. Who claimed her when she had nothing. Who proved that family isn't about blood, it's about loyalty, protection, and showing up. When showing up is hard. If you've ever judged someone by their appearance, if you've ever walked past a homeless person without seeing them, if you've ever thought that people in leather and patches were dangerous, this story is for you. Sarah Mitchell learned that angels don't always have wings. Sometimes they have engines. Sometimes they wear leather and look like everything you've been taught to fear. Sometimes the people society rejects are the ones who will save you. She gave 3 blankets and her only coat to a freezing stranger. She received a family, a home, a purpose, and proof that kindness is never, ever wasted. The Hells Angels don't forget. They don't abandon their own. And they showed Sarah and everyone watching that family isn't about blood. It's about seeing people as human. About protecting the vulnerable. About showing up when nobody else will. If this story changed how you see people, hit that subscribe button right now. Share this with someone who needs to. Remember that good people exist in unexpected places. Comment "Real Angels Ride Harleys" if you finally understand that you can't judge a book by its cover. Because Sarah Mitchell was invisible to the world, but she was never invisible to the angels. And now, neither are the people she helps. Kindness costs nothing, but it saves everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.